No one likes to think about dying, but the truth is that we all have an expiration date. I say let's make a plan for it. Welcome to Women Winning Wednesdays. I'm Elsa W. Smith, your Maryland estate planning attorney and the owner of the law offices of Elsa W. Smith, where our mission is to empower women through estate planning. Through our guest and educational content, my hope is to give you glimpses of what an empowered woman is and the tools that she needs to win. Today's topic is dealing with death, how to give a plan to your loved ones for the next day and the day after. Um, I also am going to give you a roadmap of how we're going to look at this issue. We're going to start by talking about things you should consider immediately after someone dies, what you should consider within a few days after your loved one's death, and then what you should consider doing within a couple weeks after that death. Again, so the topic today is dealing with death, how to give loved ones a plan for the day after and beyond. Losing a loved one is devastating. And really, it's impossible to fully prepare for that grief. I've personally experienced the loss of both of my parents. I recall the physical and emotional toll those experiences took on me. I also remember that there was not a lot of time to stay in that emotional place because there were funerals to plan, calls to be made, belongings to be gathered, etc. Neither one of my parents had estate plans. So, I want to share some tips for those who are left behind so that you can keep a very sad event from becoming even more painful. So, let's start by dealing with what you should think about immediately after someone dies. First thing, make sure to get a legal pronouncement of death. If you call 911, for example, paramedics may try to revive your loved one as they are trained to do. Um, Make sure you have do not resuscitate orders if that's what your loved one wished, or advanced care directives ready if your loved one chose not to want to be revived. And as soon as possible, the death should be officially pronounced by someone in authority, like a doctor, in a hospital or a nursing facility or in hospice care. The boy, tongue twister for some reason. The appropriate person also fills out the form, certifying the cause, time, and the place of death. And these steps are going to make it possible for an official death certificate to be prepared. This legal form is necessary for a number of reasons, including life insurance and financial and property issues. The body then is going to need to be transported. The county coroner and 911 can also transport the body for you. Otherwise, you'll need to contact a local funeral home or a crematorium to do this. One of our prior guests is the owner of a local funeral home. And in that interview, she described the process when they are called to recover a body and transport it. I'd like you to go back and listen to a prior Women Winning Wednesdays episode, and that was my interview with Michelle Reese Wiseman. She gave us some really good insight on this. And I'll put the link to that episode below this video. I want to mention autopsies briefly. A doctor may ask if you want an autopsy of your loved one. An autopsy is a medical procedure conducted by a specially trained physician to learn more about what caused the death. If your religion or your culture objects to autopsies, you want to make sure and discuss this with the doctor. Your loved one's medical records remain protected in the same manner after death as they were before. And there are only a few exceptions to this under the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. That's a federal law commonly known as HIPAA. Now, if your loved one had an estate plan, check to see if they signed a HIPAA authorization and who is permitted to access their protected health information after their death. I also want to address organ donation. Did your loved one want to donate their organs? Your loved one's driver's license will show whether they wanted to be an organ donor. If they wanted to do this and if they died at a medical facility, you want to notify the staff right away to begin the process of harvesting and preserving those organs. If they had an estate plan, you can check whether an organ donation form was included in your loved one's portfolio. That form will describe the extent of the donation and the purposes for which they authorized it. Another topic immediately after someone dies is don't forget about our pets. Give pets food and water and arrange for someone to come let them out or clean up after them if needed. You'll want to make plans to care for the animals for the next few weeks at least until they're given to their new guardian. These wishes might be included in your loved one's will. For many pet lovers, including myself, their furry friends are usually the closest to them, including right until the end. So be sure to care for their needs too. After seeing some animals behave after their owners are laid to rest, I'm convinced that they grieve too. They just do so in their own way. So we've talked about things you should consider immediately after someone dies. Now let's talk about things that you should consider within a few days after their death. One thing is to notify family and friends. Now, notifying family and friends can be one of the hardest duties that you have, but there are some ways to lighten the burden. Start with your loved one's closest friends and relatives. Ask them to call other family members and have kind of like a calling tree. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't worry about calling everyone. Just call the people closest to your loved one. You can reach out to the rest of their contacts later. Give yourself some grace and take breaks when you need them. Remember also to call your loved one's employer if they were working. Ask information about benefits and any paychecks that may be due. Also, ask about whether there's a company-wide life insurance policy that you should know about. Next, I want to talk about arranging for the funeral, memorial service, burial, and/or cremation. You want to search your loved one's documents to find out whether there was a prepaid burial plan. Ask a friend or family member to go with you to the mortuary. If they had an estate plan, see whether a final disposition and authorization form is included in their portfolio. That form will have your loved one's exact wishes and who they wanted to be in charge of making their final arrangements. Those persons should then prepare an obituary. Now, exactly when a funeral service should take place depends a lot on the desires of your loved one, religious practices, if that applies, and how soon family and friends can gather, especially when they're traveling from long distances. Now, many American funerals take place within a week or less from the death of the individual. With the help of a funeral home, a week is typically enough time to make arrangements and contact loved ones. Now, historically, Funerals had to take place in just a matter of days because of decomposition concerns. Now, since today there are preservation methods, families have a bit more time to prepare and get their affairs in order. This helps families make arrangements and to pick a day to hold the funeral. A standard funeral can be about up to about 2 weeks after the date of death. If the body's cremated, the family can wait as long as they'd like, but most are done within no more than a month at the latest. If the deceased is already buried or cremated, a memorial service can be held at a later date. Just remember that you won't be able to please everyone. Just do your best to honor your loved one's wishes. If the person was in the military or belonged to a fraternal or religious group or another group, contact that organization. For example, here in the DMV, as we call it, we have a significant number of military and veterans. Did your loved one wish to be buried at a veterans or national cemetery? Each one has specific eligibility requirements, so you want to make sure and know that. Did your loved one belong to a sorority or a fraternity? From my clients, I've learned that there are rituals unique to each organization that are observed when one of its members dies. In our office, we ask for this important information and include it in the final disposition form that I referred to earlier. You'll need to contact the chapter in which your loved one was an active member and advise them of your loved one's death. You'll follow similar steps if your loved one belonged to a church, synagogue, mosque, or other religious group. They will usually publish a notice of some kind to notify their members. The next thing you want to think about just within a few days after the death of your loved one is the importance of securing assets. Immediately or soon thereafter a loved one's death, some people, sometimes family, will visit the home and, how can I put this politely, help themselves to items to keep as mementos. The problem arises if that item was promised to someone else in your loved one's will. So you can guard against theft by locking the car, the house, and garage. Look for cash, keys, and other valuables, and write down a list of what you find. This will be helpful when it is time to distribute the assets. Then store these valuables in a safe place in the home. Now, if you think your family members are going to question your motives, bring one or two trustworthy people to confirm that you didn't take anything. And consider your phone to take pictures of the condition of the house and its contents. Now, while you secure the valuables, go ahead and throw out garbage and perishable food. Clean the bathrooms and do laundry. Basically, clean up anything that would go bad or cause bad odors. By the way, you can always hire someone to do this for you too. And finally, if you don't happen to live nearby your loved one, ask a neighbor or even the local police department to check on the house daily. You could even ask someone to house sit during the funeral, since unfortunately thieves sometimes look at obituaries to plan robberies when they think no one will be home. We've talked about things that you can consider within a few days after the death of your loved one. Now, we're going to turn to what you should consider within a couple of weeks after the death of your loved one. You want to secure certified copies of death certificates. My recommendation is to get between 10 and 20 copies. Other people will advise you to get fewer than that, but I say more rather than less, just in case. Death certificates are going to need to be presented when closing bank and brokerage accounts, and filing insurance claims, and registering the death with governmental agencies, among other things. The funeral home you're working with, if you're working with one, can get you copies on your behalf, or you can order them from the vital statistics office in the state where the person died. The next thing you want to do is to contact Social Security and the Veterans Administration if that applies, or other agencies from which the deceased received benefits, such as the Department of Veterans Affairs. Make sure that you contact them to stop payments and ask about any survivor benefits that the family may be entitled to. The Social Security Administration, like the Veterans Administration, recommends reporting the death as soon as possible. Though in many cases, if you're working with a funeral home, they may handle this step on your behalf. The next thing you want to consider, at least within a couple of weeks after the death of your loved one, is to contact an estate administration or probate attorney. Now, if your loved one only had a will and not a trust, the will must go through probate. While having an attorney is not required, it's highly recommended that you at least consult with an attorney to advise you of next steps. Now, the will needs to be presented to a court to determine its validity. And once that's done, the court's going to authorize a personal representative, also known as an executor, to begin closing the accounts, opening estate accounts, and marshaling assets. If there's no will, then the court will appoint a personal representative. The laws of intestacy will determine how your loved one's estate will be distributed in the case that there isn't a will. The personal representative's job is the same whether there is a will or not. That representative is going to ensure that creditors are notified and that any taxes owed are paid by the estate. Now, there are many other requirements during the probate process. That's why I said having an attorney by your side can give you peace of mind that you are following the law and meeting the court's very strict requirements. Something else you want to consider within a couple of weeks after the death of your loved one is the cancellation or transfer of services. Now, the personal representative can cancel services that are no longer needed, or maybe transfer services into the name of the person who will keep using them. So after all, if your spouse passed away, you will still need the utilities that were in their name. If utilities are needed temporarily, like keeping the deceased home's electricity connected from the time of death until the time the home is sold, then the personal representative will need to pay those bills with estate funds. And this is typically considered an acceptable estate expense. The personal representative should look for your loved one's bills and account information so they can call all these companies and make the appropriate changes. Remember to check for utility services like power and water, as well as subscriptions like streaming services or even gym memberships. Things you want to cancel, accounts you want to cancel. Some of these cancellations notify state office, like the Department of Motor Vehicles, that your loved one has died. Some of them, like email account cancellations, help protect against identity theft. Now, examples of things that need to be canceled are your loved one's driver's license, their credit cards, auto, health, disability, and other insurance policies. Now, particularly if the premiums are on auto pay, right, auto debit. You also want to close email accounts as well as social media accounts. Now, remember that companies are going to need to confirm that your loved one really passed away before they can just cancel an account. So don't be surprised if they ask for some sort of documentation. In many cases, they'll want a death certificate. I want to speak a second to social media accounts, since we are on social media. It's good to know in writing what your loved one wanted. Do they want everything deleted, or do they want their pages to continue? Encourage them to leave, you or, whoever the designated person is, specific instructions in writing, including their login credentials, username and password, just in so that that trusted person has a way of managing, the process, and make sure that everything's tidied up. Some platforms, by the way, they do provide planning tools for that trusted person to use, such as, Facebook has a legacy contact and Google has an inactive account manager feature. They can include those instructions as part of, your loved one's estate plan. One other thing, within a couple of weeks after the death of your loved one, is to, take some time to process. And I want you to at least consider grief counseling. I've had the pleasure of having a therapist on this show, who, just underscored the need, and the importance, and the social acceptability now of counseling and therapy. Grief following the death of someone close is one of the most painful and stressful life events. People experience it in different ways: emotionally, physically, spiritually. Everyone grieves differently. Shock, anger, sadness, guilt, stress, they're common feelings during this process, and they can be overwhelming. Sometimes there are no emotions at all, there's just numbness. And some people may find it really hard to cope with their loss, and some people believe that they'll never be happy again. Grief counseling offers support during this particularly challenging time. It's a form of therapy that helps those who are left behind, those who are grieving, to explore and process all these confusing feelings that they're having. Grief counseling, from what I understand, doesn't try to hurry the process along. It supports people as they grieve in their own way and in their own time. So therapy has evolved so that now you can even seek teletherapy or counseling online. You don't even have to leave home. So I urge you to at least consider it, take advantage of it. To review, we've talked about giving your loved ones a plan to deal with your death. We talked about what you should do immediately, what to do in the few days after your loved one dies, and what to do within the couple of weeks following their death. Please be aware that these are suggestions, okay? You should modify them as appropriate for your situation and your jurisdiction. I just want you to use this information to help you. I want to thank you for tuning in to this episode of Women Winning Wednesdays. If you need assistance with estate planning matters or probate estate administration matters in Maryland or the District of Columbia, and you want to have a strategy session, call us today. You see the number scrolling at the bottom of the screen. By the way, do you have a topic that you'd like me to discuss on a future episode? Let us know in the chat or in the comment section of this video. I'm Elsa W. Smith, your Maryland estate planning attorney, empowering women through estate planning. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you on the next episode. Be well. Take care.